Rule changes are afoot in the NFL, most notably the introduction of a new kickoff rule and the elimination of the hip drop tackle. And this is going to make the NFL very different next year. We are going to see more penalties, we are going to see less lower tackling, and we are going to see an increase in concussion rates. The rule changes are going to go in effect for the preseason games and will be rolled out throughout the year. Now, I don't like these rule changes, particularly the hip drop tackle one. It is subjective, it is going to be misused, and the hip drop tackle, despite having a higher rate of injury, is still a much safer tackle than many of the alternatives. There is no effective way to tackle a player from behind without getting on their hips and swiveling a little bit if there is a size discrepancy. Are you not supposed to tackle George Kittle in space now? Is Travis Kelce now unstoppable? Does he get to play until he's 40? Is he going to keep winning Super Bowls for himself and Taylor Swift? It is further weakening defensive players' positions, and in response to that, I think defensive players are either going to shy off of contact more, or they're going to resort to what they did in the past and start going high again, which leads to concussions, which are much worse for long-term health than an ankle injury, an ACL, MCL. It's not a good rule. It is done by owners trying to protect their players in the short term so they don't have to pay contracts to people who are injured, and frankly, I don't think it's going to be enforced heavily after, say, week 6. But what do you think, Tristan?
Well, I think everyone can appreciate the concept of wanting to prevent injuries and keeping your favorite players and the best players on the field as much as possible. Whether you played high school, whether you played in college, whether you played any sport at a professional level, injuries suck. They ruin your career. Whether you blow your knee out running down the field in soccer or in football, you get a concussion, you're not able to play the sport again. You want to avoid all of those scenarios. Everyone can appreciate that you want to eliminate that. Ultimately, it's also about making money for the NFL, but we can appreciate trying to prevent those injuries for these players. But the rule doesn't make that much sense, especially when you look at how the rule is written and what the NFL has said about the rule. Because technically, the hip drop tackle has not been banned. It is the hip drop tackle plus a swivel where the defender lifts his weight off the ground and then drops back down on the offensive player's legs, causing an injury or causing his ankle, what happened with Mark Andrews. So there's this weird nuance there that seems like super specific. We're going to have it be called sometimes, and then other times it might not be called when a player tackles him from behind, and it leaves a lot of, I think, potential confusion for the referees there. Now, this is all kind of looking into the future, guessing what is going to happen, but with the way it's written and how unspecific it is, and the fact that it's never been a penalty before, I think this season we're going to have a lot of games where people are upset with some penalties that are called, and it also has been said by the NFL that it may be a certain, or I don't know if this has been said by the NFL, but the reporting in the ESPN article,
they're going to fine players.
That they're going to fine, yeah, they're going to fine players more, and it'll be more letters of warning instead of rather enforcing that 15-yard penalty during the game. So ultimately, we have to wait a little bit to kind of see what the exact fallout is, but it's the way it's written and the way it's going to be implemented, I think is real. It's strange.
Like, there's going to be some situations where you dive to make a tackle, wrap up the guy's waist, and your momentum carries you under his body, or the guy's going forward so hard he drags you into twisting a little bit. That is an unavoidable part. Like, it's a good fundamental tackle, but you're trying to tackle one of the best athletes in the world, and he just kind of drags you under himself because he's going forward so fast. It's a bad rule. I could rant and rave on about the many different ways it's a bad rule, and it is clearly a short-term money-saving thing for the owners.
Well, one of the most notable instances, to speak to what you just said, was the Mark Andrews injury where Logan Wilson is tackling him from behind. A matchup between two of the best teams in the AFC North. You have Mark Andrews, who's 6'5", 250 pounds, running full speed towards the goal line. What do you expect Logan Wilson to do when he's tackling him from behind? He has to get him to the ground in order to hopefully prevent the Ravens from scoring a touchdown.
Look, if Logan Wilson really was determined to stop that play, he simply should have picked Mark Andrews up and gently rocked him down and placed him on the field. That was clearly an option for him. It was the safer way to tackle him. Instead, that thug decided to throw himself at Mark Andrews' legs. Clearly, come on, Tristan. You see, that is completely joking. That is A, the thought process of some Ravens fans, and B, how the rule's going to be enforced next year. There is no situation in which this is a good thing, short-term or long-term, for the NFL. And finding players who have been tackling this way their entire career careers instead of just making a penalty on the field. That is so dumb. Like, I understand taking the head out of football. I get that. It's impossible to take the hips out of football. There's just no way to do it. Now, they also changed the kickoff rules. So now you are going to have teams 10 men against 10 men standing, ready to engage in gladiatorial combat while the returner is back deep and the kicker is back deep as well. I don't love this rule just because I think it is going to be abused in some way in the short term. I guarantee you some wizard like Andy Reid or Sean McVay is going to break out a system which just has a massive path opening 5 times out of 10 and automatically results in a touchdown, which we can say we want more action on special teams, but I guarantee you the success rate of those kickoffs conceivably is either going to be way too low or way too high. The former kickoff had its own issues, and that actually does help player safety getting rid of that, but I don't love it. It might just be the old curmudgeon in me, but I think there is going to be an exploitation of this, and it's just going to lead to further rule changes down the line.
I think this rule, I like this rule change. I think it makes the kickoff much more exciting because it felt like the kickoff had become almost a formality. Whether it was a returner fair catching it in order to get the ball at the 25-yard line, whether it was the kicker kicking it as far as he can, trying to even kick it into the stands from where he was kicking from, it felt like that was the only thing that was happening exciting on kickoffs at this point with the way that it was going in the NFL. Now we get to a point where you almost have to kick it to the returner. The kickoff team is not sprinting down the field top speed. There's going to be more opportunities for that returner to score a touchdown, make big plays happen. From an excitement standpoint, I think it's interesting, and I like to see where it goes, and I think it opens up the door for some of the most electric players in the NFL, like a Tyreek Hill, like a CeeDee Lamb on the Cowboys when he used to return kicks and punts. It may open up the opportunity where we see some of those types of players back on special teams, like you said, instead of just standing on the sideline because special teams doesn't matter as much, where this will make special teams a much more, or the kickoff, a much more important part of the game.
Conceivably, this could bring those players back into the special teams world. At the same time, though, unless you have a clear discrepancy between your return man who also runs a 4.3 40 and has insane agility but just can't quite run routes or catch the ball, I don't think they're going to have many Tyreek Hills out there. I don't see the superstars risking their health because still, there is probably some level of injury which we do not fully realize this yet. We have to wait and see. We'd have to look at the XFL data. Maybe concussions go up. Maybe ankle injuries go up in this. Who knows? I think there's still going to be faults. Granted, it is something new, and the thing I will get behind is going to make EA and Madden scramble rapidly to re-innovate their kickoff system, which has not changed in 2 decades. So they're actually going to have to do work besides restructuring the rosters for the first time this century.
Well, they've changed how the kickoff meter works. You know, they moved it from the right stick to pressing the A button. You know, they've changed it a little bit, but to speak to what I think the actual downside, if there is a downside to this rule, is we will no longer see surprise onside kicks. I think it's making the onside kick a much more irrelevant part of the game because in order to onside kick, you have to tell the other team you're onside kicking it. There's no guesswork. There's no surprise onside kick. There's no Saints onside kick in the Super Bowl. There's no Pat McAfee, although it only really ever happened one time to my knowledge, kicking it to himself and recovering his own onside kick. And while that's a small part of the game and something that you really only see happen when you're losing with no timeouts left, under 2 minutes left in the game, it makes that even more irrelevant because since they changed the rule of where the ball is and where everyone's lined up in 2018, the onside kick recovery rate fell from 13% to 5%. So I think that's going to fall even further when you remove that element that still existed where you can maybe catch the return team off guard.
Here's the element of that which I think will get changed in the next few years. If you're going to onside kick, I think they're going to let kickers punt it. Like not just make it start from a tee, but allow some mobility to that. That is how you fix that onside kick. If you're going to declare, hey, we're doing this thing now, I think the NFL will consider making it a bit easier for the kickers to change where they can put the ball. Because coming off a tee, there's only so much a kicker can do. But if they're allowed to punt it, sky's the limit. They can put it 10 yards, 20 yards, 50 yards up in the air. They can make it a lot more exhilarating and competitive. Granted, you then run the issue of that becoming a too effective strategy and teams just onside kick every time, but problems for down the line.
I think with this rule change is trying to make the return game more exciting and have it become a bigger part of the game. I do think it's going to make, like I already said, make the onside kick game more irrelevant than it already is. And we're going to see, whether it be next season or 2 seasons down the line, that rule come about that they kind of mentioned, where it's like maybe a 4th and 20 from wherever you are in the field in order to get the ball back instead of having to onside kick it. You can't kick an onside kick if you tell the other team you're kicking it deep, and you have to tell them when you're onside kicking. It's going to make all that so much easier.
I hate that 4th and 20 rule of the passion. That if you want to just get kicking out of football, we can get kicking out of football entirely, because that's what that 4th and 20 rule is slowly tiptoeing to. Because you know there's going to be some coach out there, Dan Campbell, who does that 4th and 20 every single time. Problems for Thicc Man Inc. in 2030.
There's a few changes. I think we saw it a lot this past season, specifically with intentional grounding. It was called more than it's ever been in the past. There are a few where you kind of raise your eyebrow. Also with, what is it, roughing the passer and hits out of bounds. The officials in the booth are able to call down to the field and overrule and have some influence and expedite that process, which I think is a good thing, because there's a few times last season, I can't exactly name specific moments, where the quarterback was clearly either in the tackle box or outside of the tackle box, and he got called for intentional grounding, and there was no change on the field when it shouldn't have been a penalty. So I don't really see the downside of this. Hopefully this is maybe a move towards the whole pass interference and that thing being reviewable and making that better. And it's a small, I think it's a step in the right direction.
The words pass interference and reviewable are never going to be a good thing. We saw what that looked like after the Saints-Rams NFC Championship game, but my concern is this becomes once again another way to hurt defensive players, because can they signal down penalty and say, oh, wait a second, that actually was a penalty? I know you didn't see it on the field, but if in slow motion, he hits him up around the shoulder area, and we think he gets up at the head area, which, given how rampant roughing the quarterback or roughing the passer calls have been, I know some will come off the boards, but I just feel like more often than not, this is going to lead to a defensive player getting penalized. More, it's going to lead to an intentional grounding being rectified.
I disagree with that, because I feel like more often than not, referees are more cautious with those types of penalties, and then you see the hit looked like it was completely clean because he didn't hit him in the head, and he hit him with his shoulder, and it was a fine hit. And I think a review like that can maybe cause that to not be a penalty, where we've seen that kind of call and pass and you're left disappointed because ultimately the wrong call was made.
Or we're going to see a ref say, oh, well, we can always just review this up top and it looked sort of high. Here's the flag. And then in slow motion, well, it's not really that bad of a hit, but we also don't have enough to overturn. It's clearly kind of high. I don't think watching the game in slow motion and awarding penalties based off that is ever going to be a good thing, because if we do that, we can just put a camera down the offensive line and just march the defense back 5 yards every single time because someone's holding someone else, or vice versa. There are penalties every play, and the slower you look at the game, which is not the way the game is played, the more apparent those penalties become.
That is a good point as far as like what does this mean for other penalties like holding and things like that. I think with these penalties specifically, I don't see a whole lot of negative that can happen, and maybe it helps the review.
Well, when the Chiefs win a playoff game because of a reviewed roughing the passer call, Patrick Mahomes got his elbow smacked, we can revisit this video. That's another thing with hip drop tackle. You know, and I know, the Chiefs are going to win a game because of this, without a doubt. I know it's been echoed by others before, but the first thing I thought of, aside from, of course, concussion rates going up, this is going to work in the Chiefs' favor somehow.
I think that's a silly notion, but just the idea of why this became such a prominent rule that people were looking to be changed, or owners that were looking to be changed, is because some of these tackles where we saw big name players get injured, they happened on primetime television in big games when the whole country is watching and more people are watching than when it's a smaller game just at 1 p.m. So I think that also affected the level of relevance of getting this rule changed or getting this rule implemented. Same as the Chiefs are always on primetime television. They're always the night game or 4 p.m. game, and that's why people see the poor refereeing or bad calls that happens in every other game, but the most people watch the Chiefs, so they're going to always feel
it is a delusional notion, and this is going to become an entire other video if we don't head it off here, that the Chiefs are not favored by the officials late in games. We can keep talking about it.
I disagree. I do
not care. Anyway, Those are our thoughts on the new NFL rule changes. Let us know what you think about them down in the comments below. We don't like hip drop tackles. We are divided on the kickoff and review stuff. Like, share, subscribe if you're still here, and we will see you next week.